Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience this morning while we dealt with a matter that I believe I've addressed each of you on. I have released juror number one from this jury, and I would ask alternate juror number one if you would slide down one seat. You are now juror number one for the remainder of this trial. All right, very well. I believe where we left off yesterday afternoon was in the cross-examination by Mr. Arbor. Mr. Arbor?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Brown.
Good afternoon.
I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. I think I was asking you around the time that, after Mr. Broyhill had moved to Raleigh, had been living with you for those few months, he at that point was still with Universal Mental Health, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then, we talked about this, your wife's company was starting to get a little busier, taking on some additional clients, and that's where felt she was in a position to hire him to come work for her, correct?
Yes, sir.
You gave a little testimony about, that you were somewhat, or at least thought you were somewhat familiar with his experience level at that point with like doing clerical work for the company he was with, so thought it would be okay for what she was seeking to do, correct?
That I thought it would be okay, or that she thought it would be okay?
Did you think it was a good or a bad idea to hire Mr. Broyhill at that particular point in time?
I knew better than to question Jamie's decisions, but I supported the idea. Yes, that's fine.
I guess the point I'm asking is when the decision made, sounds like it was more of a, he's our friend, he's expressed an interest in what we do. For what you would be asking him to do, it would fit. It's not like she was out putting in something, a want ad or something
Yes, sir, that's
somewhere,
correct.
like recruiting someone to do this job, correct?
Correct.
This was just sort of like, she's got this it's a small startup company for her at that point, correct?
Yes, sir.
And she's just thinking, you know, I could use some help. He's our friend. Basically, John, do you want to come work for me type thing, correct?
Yes, sir.
There was some testimony about what it was that he did. He had, and I think you said this, he didn't have, this was 2010 when that decision was made, correct?
Yes, sir.
Because I think two of you got married in '09, and I think it was sometime late in '09 when Mr. Broyhill moved to Raleigh and lived with you in the apartment complex, right? So now we're into some part of 2009 spring maybe when the decision was made to ask him to come on board and work for her.
I believe Jamie made the decision in March, but I'm not sure exactly. It was sometime in the spring. Yes,
spring.
Sir.
And I think you testified he had not. He had talked with you and your wife about politics and things. Certainly talked with you a lot about it. I mean, even prior to the time you were getting married. But he didn't have any, to the best of your knowledge, any experience in working on like a campaign or anything.
He had volunteered, to my knowledge, on some occasions, but not paid experience and not extensive experience.
He had not done anything like Jamie had done.
Correct.
And I mean, you're both, young at that time, but you've worked on a presidential campaign, at least as a volunteer, correct?
Yes, sir.
You've been a paid worker on that congressional campaign in South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
And we started talking about this a little bit yesterday with the Sierra Club, and even I think and I'll get to this, even with the company you're with now, you worked on a lot of social issues that sort of caused you to cross paths with politicians with some frequency. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Mr. Broyhill did not have that kind of experience.
No, sir.
There came a point then when he joins her company, and then he's sort of now getting immersed into this type of work. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir.
And that involved all of the, there's a fairly large social component to political strategy and fundraising work. Would that be fair?
Define social component.
A lot of interaction with a lot of different people at a lot of different occasions.
That's fair.
I mean, a lot of this is done with things that are on the fly. Grab coffee, grab a bite. You're at this office, you go to another office. A lot of telecommunication. It's just it's a very active thing.
That's correct.
There comes a point, and I think it was, you said August of 2010, and your wife had taken on this new client, this woman who was running as a Democrat for Congress in South Carolina, correct? This Jane Dyer?
Yes.
And this was I mean, this is involunteering. This is a paid job. This is the kind of thing that your wife was trying to do. You know, we'll sort of provide a lot of the strategizing, fundraising, management of your campaign, and then there is a fee paid for that service, correct?
Yes.
There's other, I mean, this is not unique. There's other people out there that do this type of work, right?
There are.
But she was hired for this particular campaign, and one of the first things that Mr. Broyhill was assigned to do was work on that campaign. So he went with your wife to South Carolina when that was sort of getting ramped up around August 2010.
I mean, she was down there frequently. She didn't move down there fully until much closer to the election day, but he moved into a like a house that the campaign had or that the candidate had.
The candidate, if I recall, it came of some means. She had some means, financial means, backing her and herself. I think she's like something with the Food Lion people or something like that.
She's a FedEx pilot.
I'm sorry?
She's a FedEx pilot.
FedEx Violet?
Pilot.
Pilot. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, I speak from. I've got a Lenore accent sometimes.
And she secured some place. She found somebody who was helping with the campaign. There was a place found for Mr. Broyhill to live while he was there working on the campaign. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was his designated job for those time from whenever he went there sometime around August 2010 up until the election. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And he literally lived there. Your wife would go back and forth, and I think you said stayed a lot there closer to the election time, but from about August on, he had left the Raleigh area and was sort of immersed into the campaign life. Would that be fair?
Yes.
That election was unsuccessful, and as we talked about yesterday, it's sort of the nature of the business. Candidate loses, they don't need the strategy company anymore, correct?
Yes, sir.
So suddenly your wife found that, you know, there's a client that you lose. Just to educate the jury a little bit, when a candidate wins, it's not uncommon for the candidate to keep the strategist on board even after the campaign is over, because they're usually ramping up for another campaign after that, correct?
That's correct.
So once you sort of win the election, you sort of, unless there's some reason where there's a parting of the ways, oftentimes the strategizing company, such as Sky Blue Strategies, would just stay on.
Yes, sir.
This election was unsuccessful, so there was no point in that. Mr. Broyhill returned to the Raleigh area, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he returned to living with, he did not go back to the townhouse with, where he'd been living with Mr. Fox, correct?
Correct.
He came to live again with you and your wife,
For a brief period of time, yes, sir.
right? You was still at the apartment complex?
We were.
And I believe you said he was a, I think the word you used, he was a W-2 employee, correct?
Correct.
He was not hired as an independent contractor. He was actually hired as an employee of Sky Blue Strategies. So as you indicated yesterday, your wife treated him as such, and so there was tax, Social Security and taxes and everything being withheld and also paid to cover his salary that he'd receive in exchange for working there, correct?
That's what I remember, yes, sir.
When the Dyer election was lost, what happened was he was laid off from Sky Blue Strategies, correct?
Yes, sir.
And had worked a long enough period of time that he could put in for unemployment, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, of course, he's free at any time to go do whatever he wanted to do. If he wanted to go get another job, he certainly could have, and there's nothing that you or Ms. Hahn would have prevented him from doing that, correct?
Oh, yes, I'm correct.
Right, but in the time that he was on unemployment, though, and not having secured other employment, it's sort of like an informal, I won't even call it an understanding. I think he just sort of volunteered. He'll just continue to do things with Sky Blue Strategies while he's looking for other work. Would that be fair?
Yes, I mean there was hope, I think, on Jamie's behalf, and I don't want to speak for her, that he would help or assist with as they hunted for new clients, which was their primary or basically only responsibility at that point.
Right. This wasn't like a news flash to him. I mean, the two of you sort of laid it out. This is a new company you were starting up, and you don't know how it's going to take off, and of course you don't know what a candidate's going to do in an election until after the election. So there was, going into the job, and leaving Universal Mental Health, there was sort of eyes open. You might be out of a job after the election, correct?
I would expect that Jamie explained that, yes, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, none of this was like a surprise to anybody. It was sort of anticipated that could happen, but the plan was also to go and search out other candidates and other projects to work on that would bring more revenue in, and then hire him back, correct?
Jamie's plan was to absolutely look for new clients, and I believe it was, I mean, I know that they had discussed, him coming back on should they find the clients. Yes, sir.
As soon as she could afford to do that.
Yes, sir.
There came a point, I think sometime now we're into January 2011, so he stays with you a couple of months, and then you're able to, and I covered this yesterday, you had a bunch of friends, your friends, John was becoming their friends as well. There was friends that were renting an apartment or maybe a townhouse in the area called Remington in the Green. Billy Kirk and Ben Gutman, correct?
Yes, sir.
Those were, Billy's a name that pops up at the beach trip that we'll get to. But he was a friend of yours from Chapel Hill, correct?
Correct.
And Ben Gutman, I think you said, was a friend of yours from Lenore.
He was.
And these two friends of yours were renting this place, and they had an extra room, so Mr. Broyhill moved in with them for a while, and they shared rent and all lived in the same place together, correct?
Yes, sir.
That lasted, I think, until your friend Ben Gutman, I think he had a girlfriend and got married or something.
He was married in 2013.
All right, but did he have a girlfriend that he wanted to move in with or something like that?
He did.
It was Kaylin.
Correct.
And they invited Billy to move in with them as well, correct?
Correct.
There was nothing saying that Mr. Broyhill couldn't move in as well, but it was, I think the living arrangements would have been a little cramped, I guess, where they were, correct?
I think so. I can't remember if they stayed at that apartment or if they moved to their house then. But anyways, they would have ultimately moved to a house.
You, in addition to your professional work regarding, now are you still with Sierra Club at that point?
I left Sierra Club in 2000, January of 2000, December or January, either December of 10. No, sorry. I left Sierra Club at the end of 2009, early 2010, and proceeded to work with the United Football League beginning in 2010.
Oh, okay. Well, you're with this company, New Kind, right now, correct?
Correct.
When did you start with them?
I started with them. I started hanging out at their offices in December of 2011, and then started working there formally in January 2012.
Okay, so toward the end of 2011, okay. And then in the interim, you worked for United Football League?
That's correct.
What did you do for them?
Social media.
Social media.
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of your area of expertise. That's what you went, I mean, you went to school for political science, but I think you segued off into that, correct?
Yes.
In addition to, even though you're working for the Football League, you stayed involved in a number of different social issues. You still volunteered your time on things, other things, correct?
Yes, sir.
Political candidates that you favored, you were helping them out whenever you could, correct?
Yes, sir.
And this sort of part of I mean, you're in a field that this is something you want to throw into, but also this was a business that your wife was trying to get started, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you're going to try to get that business started in the Democratic, or any, it doesn't matter what party it is, you've got to be present. You got to make your presence known so that people know you, correct?
I think that's fair to say.
And so being involved in projects and meeting the people that do these types of things where they interact with the politicians, I mean, you can kill two birds with one stone. You can get involved in a project that's valuable to you, and at the same time, you might make some connections that could lead to a client. Would that be fair?
I don't know that that's always the intent, but I think that certainly happens.
When one of the projects, and I'm not saying that this was a project that you did, either of you did for, to gain a client, but you did volunteer at these different, for different causes. One of the causes that you and your wife, and sometimes Mr. Broyhill, volunteered your time with was Planned Parenthood, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, I think you helped them, you and your wife helped them organize an annual event, or what you had hoped to be an annual event in 2012, something like Picking for Protection or something like that.
I can't remember the exact name, but yes, sir.
Helped raise money for that organization, is that correct?
Some. Yes, sir.
Got to meet the policy director there, a woman by the name of Patty Dillon,
Yes, sir.
and she became a friend of yours.
Correct.
Right. She had a place at that you've been in here for the testimony, and you heard John Wallace testify about that there was this apartment complex near his office, Bacana,
Yes, sir.
and she lived there, correct? Or maybe not at that time.
I'm not sure.
But there came a point where Ms. Dillon and Mr. Broyhill did rent a place in that complex, correct?
Correct.
That's the one that Mr. Wallace was talking about, the one that he said, think that Mr. Broyhill lived close by to him, correct?
Yes, sir.
Even though there was this time that, like moving in with Ben, the time when he moved in with Patty, even Paul Foxfellow, that did not stop contact between you and your wife and Mr. Broyhill.
No, sir.
That continued, even in the times that he didn't live with you, he would still visit with you quite frequently, correct?
Yes, sir.
Even in times when he was other places, it would not be uncommon for.
Overnight. On occasion, yes, sir. Sir. And he would dog sit for us on occasion.
I was going to ask you about that. There were times when you were starting to gather, and I apologize, you told me yesterday, I don't remember, when did you move to the house in Tealwood?
2011.
When was, would you remember when? It was in the spring, right?
It was in the spring. I believe it was May 2011. It may have been early June, but I think it was May.
So at that point in time, you were with the, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Broyhill, he worked, well, he did unemployment for a while and continued to help your wife. I don't believe ever got any other employment for him back on, correct? In that time frame, and it wasn't always just in that time frame, but when he had that sort of downtime, particularly when he was on the unemployment stuff, he would often, if you needed him to, if you and your wife had to go to some function or you had to go somewhere together, there were times he would stay and watch your house, take care of the pets, things like that, correct?
Absolutely.
That was not uncommon.
No,
A lot
sir.
of times you volunteered to give him money for doing that, right?
Yes, sir.
He never asked for it, but he would volunteer to do it, but sometimes you would just say, no, I want you to take some money for this, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, there were some people that he would do that for also in exchange, make a couple of bucks watching their pets for them, correct?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Did you know friends, and again, there are a lot of mutual friends, Jeff Engel and Stuart Campbell.
Yes, sir.
He would do that for them. He'd watch their dogs from time to time and get paid for that, correct?
Yes, sir.
There was another friend, I think you mentioned her name, Carol Erickson.
Yes, sir.
She was someone involved in the Brad Miller campaign.
She was on Brad Miller's congressional staffs.
On the congressional, not on the campaign committee, but worked for him as a congressman.
Correct, sir.
Oh, okay. She lived in a townhouse somewhere where she had a dog that had difficulty doing stairs, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you knew Mr. Broyhill to be, he was also a friend of hers, correct?
Yes, sir.
See her frequently, wouldn't he?
Yes, sir.
In fact, he'd sometimes go to her house 1 to 2 times a day to carry the dog up and down the stairs for her because she had difficulty doing that, right?
He began doing that at some point. I'm not sure exactly when, but yes, sir.
You were aware of that.
Yes, sir. When her husband was out of town.
When her husband, because he'd go out of town, I guess, on trips for, I don't know about extended periods, but he'd be out, and whenever that would happen, Mr. Boyle would go over and help her with the dog going up and down the stairs.
Yes, sir.
But all through all of this, the three of you remained very close. Would that be fair?
That's fair.
In fact, would it be fair for me to say in many ways, even though you'd been friends with Mr. Broyhill longer, because the two of them were working close, your wife became very close with Mr. Broyhill. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir.
The three of you would travel places together, correct?
We did. Yes, sir.
Quite often you'd go to, we talked yesterday, your wife had 2 sets of parents down in South Carolina. One of them, I think her dad, had a place in Beaufort,
Yes, sir.
South Carolina, and on the water or near the water.
Yes, sir.
You'd go down, the three of you would go down there and visit at his house. So that was a frequent trip, right?
Yes, sir.
You'd take day trips to Wrightsville Beach together.
Yes, sir.
You, I think you went to a place that Mr. Broyhill's parents frequented sometimes, called Pigeon Forge, Tennessee,
We did once. Yes, sir.
and even met up with his parents on that trip, where, because that's a place where they go, I guess, more frequently, correct?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
There's some other friends that went with all of you on that trip, right?
Yes, sir.
And you recall renting like hotel rooms that adjoined with his parents.
Yes, sir.
Everybody went to dinner at some place called the Apple Barn.
Yes, sir.
So I mean, and you knew his side of you knew his father.
Yes, sir.
Not maybe really, really well, but you certainly knew him.
Yes, sir.
It wasn't like a guy that you go hang out with all, if it was just the two
No,
of
sir.
you. Right. There were times when all of you would take trips back to Lenore, right?
Yes, sir.
Oftentimes when that would happen, more often than not, maybe 2 or 3 times, you'd drive and drop him off at his parents' house when you got there, correct?
I think we did. I remember once maybe, but I'm not. I don't remember that happening frequently. Because usually it would be around holidays, and so we would be going on to South Carolina, and he would be remaining in Lenore.
And then you'd come back to Lenore and pick him up and then go back?
I don't remember ever doing that, sir.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, I suspect he. I think he rode with us at least once. Yes, sir.
You ever remember picking him up at his parents' house?
I remember that Jamie and I joined them, his father and stepmother, for a meal around a holiday. I'm not sure which holiday. I can't recall. It may have been
in
Easter.
Lenore?
Yes, sir.
And that may have been the thing I was trying to get to.
Yes, sir.
You had interacted socially, not a lot, but socially with his father and stepmom.
Yes, sir.
Both you and Jamie.
Yes, sir.
You all took a trip to Las Vegas together in 2009, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were with Sierra Club at that point?
I was.
There was something you had to do out there for work, and it just happened to coincide with Thanksgiving, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you correct me if I'm wrong, like I said yesterday, if I say something wrong, I believe Mr. Broyhill met you on the Wednesday prior to that Thanksgiving in Las Vegas?
Jamie and I flew out on, I believe, Monday or maybe Tuesday, and he would fly out later.
And then you all stayed like at the Luxor or one of the casinos there?
Yes, sir.
And then stayed, I guess, all together and sort of turned into a quasi-work vacation thing, right?
Mm-hmm. And there were other friends who were out there as well.
Right, others went along. And
Correct.
there was like similar, and when you would do these trips and other people going, usually it was, at least from what you knew of Mr. Boyle, he'd usually share a room with one or more people and then just sort of split the cost of things. Was that your understanding?
Most often, yes, sir.
There was a trip to Atlanta in March of 2013.
Yes, sir.
You and your friend Billy, your mutual friend Billy Kirk, had a classmate from Chapel Hill who was getting married,
Yes, sir.
and I believe Mr. Broyhill went along. I don't think he knew that classmate, right?
He had met him previously, but didn't know him well.
So he didn't attend the wedding, but he went along for the trip.
Yes, sir.
And he shared a room or something with Billy, correct?
Yes, sir.
We're going to get into the week of prior to the events that were on where you were at Emerald Isle. That wasn't the first time that had happened. You'd rented a beach house before near the beach over the summer, and Mr. Broyhill was invited to be sort of like the same thing, come down later part of the week and spend a weekend with you at a beach house.
That was
You had
summer of
rented.
2010. Yes, sir.
2010.
Yes, sir.
You talked about, I think something came up in the direct testimony about Amendment 1, which was, your wife was a strategist in the campaign opposing Amendment 1, correct?
Sky Blue was hired to do the fundraising for that campaign.
And I think there was a gentleman in charge of that was Phil.
Yes, sir.
And you had a contract, let's say New Kind had a contract with doing something for that campaign, correct?
Yes, sir.
You might have been influential in putting your wife together with people from the anti-Amendment 1 group.
They're involved, and we can't remember acted, but regardless, I met Mr. Kennedy first, and as he said he was looking for a fundraiser, I said, well, you know, Sky Blue, my wife's firm, is very good, and you should speak with them.
And in fact, that's exactly what they did,
Mm-hmm.
right?
They were actually hired before New Kind was hired.
And Mr. Broyhill worked on that.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And was not successful. Amendment 1 did pass at that time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it was a lot of work had been put into that by everybody, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yourself included, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so there was sort of like, we need to just go decompress a little bit.
Yes, sir.
And the decision was made to take a trip, all of you, to Puerto Rico, correct?
Yes, sir.
And have you?
We had, or at least with him, and I think he's the trip. So ultimately, it was just the three of us. After a couple of friends did not agree to or could not go.
It was on that trip that Mr. Broyhill did meet another guy that he had been, correct? He met somebody that he thought this might be a connection on the trip to Puerto Rico.
I don't necessarily recall that. I remember him. I mean, I know that he interacted with at least one guy that he referenced, but I'm not sure that there was like a. I never understood it to be like a romantic, this is going to be a long-term relationship.
Might not have developed into anything big.
That was that was never my understanding, sir.
Mr. Broyhill told Jamie about that, correct?
I don't remember, sir. I don't know.
Okay. Would it be fair for me to say then, when it came to things, that you did mention something that he, in testimony yesterday, that he did have some issues regarding, not having a life partner or somebody in his life, like you had found.
He was certainly sad at that, yes.
And he talked with your wife about that quite a bit, right?
He would.
She was very sympathetic toward him for that issue, right?
Of course.
She was in many ways very caring.
Absolutely.
Of Mr. Broyhill.
Absolutely.
I think you gave a number of different statements in preparation of this trial to both police and the district attorney's office, correct?
Yes, sir.
I think you've given a number of statements in the past where you said in many ways Jamie was maybe more patient with Mr. Broyhill than you were at times.
I guess so. I guess she would be more patient. She usually was.
It came in the context of sometimes when, you'd be asking him about maybe things that he needed to do or should be doing, not necessarily for the company, even for himself. She'd sort of hold you back and say, don't be too demanding of him, because he had issues that everybody believed were, affecting him at the time.
That's true. Yes, sir.
Sort of mothered him a little bit, sort of making sure he took care of himself, made sure he ate, things like that.
Jamie mothered almost everyone in her life.
Yesterday, well, about this thing about him being homosexual, you did not know him to have like a steady partner. You knew of a couple of names, right?
Yes, sir.
There was like the Brent person.
Yes, sir.
But that was someone from Lenore.
Yes, sir.
And that was someone that I think with and you correct me if I'm wrong, said that he hadn't come out to you at that point and hadn't told you this is like my boyfriend or my partner or whatever. You sort of assumed that because they took vacations and things.
I mean, at that point, they were presented as friends.
Right. He didn't present him in any other fashion.
No, sir.
There was
not at that point.
Another fellow by the name of Perry.
Yes, sir.
Did you meet him?
We would, yes, sir.
And that didn't become a terribly long-term thing either, did it?
It was presented to us as sort of an on and off type of relationship for some length of time. I can't recall exactly how long.
He really didn't have a person that was, like you would call them a couple.
No, sir.
In the time that you were interacting with him here, at least here in the Raleigh area. Right?
No, sir.
And as you said, you did know that he had talked about in the past having a relationship with at least the two women's names that I'd mentioned, the Jennifer from Lenore and I think Sarah from when he was younger, correct?
Yes, sir.
It'd be fair for me to say that in this time that he's in Raleigh and even prior to that, I mean, I don't know how much you can speak to the time when you were away at college, but in the time that you were hanging out with Mr. Broyhill a lot, he didn't present as a person who had a lot of money. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
In fact, you knew him, had always sort of known him to be not terribly good with money. Would that be fair?
He was still living with his father for most of the time he was in Lenore, so he had no rent to pay, so he had ready cash, more than you would if you were paying rent. And so, he would go and buy clothes, et cetera, et cetera.
Frivolous things. I don't want to say frivolous things, but I mean, he couldn't point to a whole lot and say, this is what I bought with my money. I got some stocks, I've got the bank account, I've got a house, something of that nature.
No, I mean, it was the standard stuff that people in their 20s usually tend to buy rather than stocks or houses.
When you were younger, when you did hang out together a lot, but even before you went to Chapel Hill, it was sort of a joke. He was constantly using his card, and the overdraft protection was kicking in a lot.
He did run into overdraft right before pay periods, semi-regularly.
There was you talked about those trips, the week-long trips you used to take to Myrtle Beach. There was one time I think that you used to point it out to him about going out one day and just without even realizing buying like $400 worth of clothes, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, not in a nasty way or anything. You'd almost sort of like you have to joke around with him a little bit, like he didn't know how to save a dollar.
I was 14 and 15, so I didn't know how to save a dollar either, but it was certainly a joke.
And it's sort of in what you do in the political arena, it's an occupational hazard a little bit with all the interaction, socializing you're talking about. It's not uncommon to, you're meeting people at a Starbucks, you're meeting people at a restaurant, you're meeting people at the after, work cocktail hour. I mean, money gets spent, and it's not uncommon in that business, correct?
Yes, sir.
Plus, when your wife was a fundraiser.
Yes, sir.
That's not uncommon. People are running for office. There are functions. There are dinners they have. They send out tickets. People pay money to go to those things, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if you want to be part of the business, you have to sort of shell out sometimes to be at those things so that you can make those connections, correct?
That's fair.
Mr. Arbor, we're going to go ahead and recess for the lunch break. And we'll resume at 2:30, ladies and gentlemen. Please recall the instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express any opinions about the outcome of the case. No media or independent investigation regarding these matters. And please have no conversation or communications with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your notepads in your chairs. Gather in the deliberation room at 2:30. And everyone else, please remain seated while the jurors excuse themselves.